a UX designer in Zurich. I focus on application design, and I have a special interest for Android. I love Android, but I think there is room for improvement in the overall user experience of the applications available today. And I think I'm not the only one who thinks this is a problem. 55% of all apps on Google Play have less than 1,000 downloads. That's not that many, and it might be okay if you on average spend just a few days on developing your apps, but I think most developers spend more time than that. And the problems don't end there. It's not only difficult to get customers or get users, it's also difficult to keep them once you have them. So after 90 days, 75% of your users will have stopped using your application. And why is this? My thought is that the user, or the apps on the Play Store don't match the expectations of the user. So what are the problems? Well, mainly there are apps that don't get the job done. Apps that are confusing, overcomplicated, and with outdated looks will not be accepted by the users today. An underlying problem to this is a lack of understanding the user's needs. And of course, if you're sitting in an office all day working with your colleagues and never actually seeing the end user or your users, it's difficult to know who they are and what their needs are. I was working on a mobile solution to do claims management in the insurance business about a year ago. And we were building a solution to replace the current tablet PC solution, where they use tablet PCs and handheld cameras, with just an iPad. The user of the program were insurance assessors. In their work, they go out into the field, they inspect cars, and then they make repair cost estimates on how much it costs to repair this car. This image is from a field study that I had the opportunity to follow an assessor around in the field to understand more about what he does. Right here, we are in a garage underneath a body shop, and here they store the total lost cars, and they're crammed together really tightly in a dark space. He has to document I think it's this vehicle. So he's climbing around on the other cars. He's holding on with one hand, and in the other hand he holds his camera, and then he takes a photo. We wanted to replace that with an iPad. And you think, how do you hold an iPad and take a photo? This doesn't work. And it was so apparent when we were out there to see that, but this is something that we didn't think about before. And had we known earlier, it would have been even better, of course. But at least we saw this, and it kind of gives an idea of the importance of it. So when you get to know your users, it's important to know who they are, why they're using your application, and when and where, so in which situation your application will be used. So what can you do to better know your users? Well, as I said, what I did was an observation. So I just went out and I looked at him when he was working, and I just noted down some things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. But of course, you can also communicate with your users, even though you don't necessarily get the possibility to go out and talk to them, or not to go out and follow them around. You can do focus groups to get a viewpoint from multiple people to discuss a certain point. You can have interviews to explore specific issues. You can also do questionnaires and send them out, especially if your end users are further away from you. So you don't necessarily have the possibility to use them. In the context of Android, you can even use the Android reviews as an initiation to communication. Because if a user has actually taken time to give you feedback without you asking for it, if you need more information, they're mostly glad to give it to you. I think the last case that I have on this slide is if you don't have any access to your user whatsoever. And this, of course, happens. And what you can do then is you can sit down with your team, and you can do some basic profiling, like just figuring out the user groups and some characteristics of the user. And to remember this better and put a face to your user, you can write it down into a small persona that will help you remember, just to describe the different user groups. So, the idea of knowing your user is to be able to know and focus on the core functionality of your app. So, what is it that your app needs to be good at? And then, focus on that core functionality. It's important to keep apps simple. And in the late 1990s, there was an MP3 player that was quite famous. It had a lot of users. It was a huge success. It was simple. It was very focused on MP3 playing. It had an equalizer and I think, a little playlist or something. Following their success, they were bought by AOL. And it seems that AOL didn't really share their vision of simplicity, but they had one that seems to be the more features, the better. This is Winamp today. There's a browser in it. I'm kind of speechless to this, but
does it make coffee?
maybe the next version I'll so they have a browser in here. But not only that, you can play your videos, and this is what I remember the most from Winamp when it started growing out of what it initially did, is that the videos that I tried to play on my computer started in Winamp. It's like, no. And the interesting thing is that after AOL started loading Winamp, they lost more than half of their user base. So, keep it simple and avoid bloating. And if you're working on a feature that is not, that doesn't fulfill a business goal or a user task, you're wasting your time and you will be wasting your user's time as well. So, try to avoid that as much as possible to keep it as simple. So, having just so you're supposed to do one thing and do it well, and the clear focus will help the apps. But then it's also important to present the right thing at the right time. So based on the task that the user is currently doing, make sure to only present what is relevant for that task, especially in mobile, to keep it simple. And then you can emphasize the necessities, like if there's some piece of information that is key on that page, make it a bit bigger so it's easier to scan the page and get that information. So, let's say you were designing a teapot, and if you just look at the features, it would be that it needs to have a spout, it needs to have some kind of container, a handle, and a lid. And it doesn't quite cut it. This simply is not usable. So it needs to make sense. And who decides if your app or your product makes sense? I would say it's the users, because in the end, it's their expectations that you need to match or exceed. So what can we do to achieve usability, to get better at it? Well, first of all, design for the tasks and goals. Make sure that everything that you design has a purpose, and then check it with your users in order to see that it actually works. With the teapot, had they tried it out? That was actually an art project, but still, had they tried it out, they would have found the flaws in it. So yeah, make sure you support what the user is trying to achieve, and then test whatever you've implemented with your users, because there's so much information that you can get. You can do simple usability testing with just a few people. Give them your application, give them a task to carry out, and just look at them and ask them if they seem confused. And you will find so much information from that. And then, yeah, when you have your feedback, you need to solve your issues and test it again and see if it works better. So far we have a usable app, but I think in the harsh climate of apps today, it's not quite enough. Users expect more. So what else can we do? To get the best chances, it needs to look good. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is that we are more tolerant towards things that we find attractive. So if there's an application that has a problem, users will actually find it a less severe problem because the app is free. There was a story made, or there was a study made on the influence of design aesthetics in usability testing. What they did was they gave two different phones, one ugly phone and one pretty phone, to teenagers. And they gave them some tasks to carry out, and the results showed that not only did they at first glance think that pretty phone was more usable, but when they measured it, the test subjects were more efficient. They performed the tasks faster with a prettier phone. And I think that is quite an interesting result, and something that you don't necessarily consider when you just think about making an app pretty. Another thing about beauty, especially in the app context, is that the first thing the user sees about your app is usually a screenshot. And if it looks pretty, they will probably be more interested in trying it out because it looks like a lot of attention has been paid to the application. It also builds trust. Which one of these two 1960s Volvos do you think is more reliable?
Left one? Because it's not broken so far.
Yeah, I would have guessed that the red one, and the reason being that we project the attributes of what we see toward the functionality of it as well. Just in this photo, you cannot do anything, but if you look at a real car, you could actually pop the hood and you can check the engine state and make a more valid verification of which is better, or which is in a better state, which is more reliable. When it comes to apps, this isn't really something that you can do as a user. You download the app, you can try it out and see how it feels, but the idea is that if you, for a user, if you see something that is well designed and polished, the chances are that the developers have paid as much attention to the inside as to the outside. So now, simple usable and beautiful apps will get you far. But looking at mobile today, there are more things to consider. Today, the different mobile operating systems have clearly defined standards. They provide guidelines, and users are kind of expecting a cohesive platform experience throughout the platform. And if you want to achieve that as a developer, you kind of need to acknowledge that there are guidelines out there, have a look at them, try and follow them. The guidelines out there, they cover a lot of things. They go from style guides to navigation patterns, which building blocks to use. And I think in most cases, you will be able to follow them, but there are some cases in which they won't fit, and then it is of course not to do that. But in most cases, I think you will benefit from following them, because it will not only save you time, because you're not reinventing the wheel, but it will also save your users time, because basically before they start using your application, they kind of know how it works. Another thing about Android is that Android is not just phones. There are multiple devices that the user can use in order to view and try your app. And it doesn't, depending on your target users, it doesn't have to be perfect on all the different devices, but I think it should at least work, sort of. You should maybe make an effort there to not give a really crappy experience where someone can't access it. The last point is smart apps. And when I think about smart apps, I think about Google Now. It might be a bit to the extreme, and it might not be exactly where you want to go, but there are small things that you can actually use to make your apps feel better for the user. Because the fact is that user input is really, really hard on mobile devices. So if you can keep this to a minimum, make use of what the device knows, then you can create better experiences. One thing that we're doing in an app that I'm working on, my pet project, is that, okay, so it's a time tracker, and we ask to read the contacts from the phone book. And the reason for that is, within the application, you can create a project for a customer. And when you're typing the customer name, you just do a simple autocomplete. So when you start typing, you don't have to type the full name, because chances are that you already have the companies that you're working for in your phone book. It's just small things like this that makes the experiences easier, or experiences better. So, out of all these topics that I've been talking about, none of them are good enough on their own. You need a combination in order to achieve good UX. But the thing is, one thing that I mentioned before was that we're not matching the user's expectations. And I think if you make sure your user's voice is heard, then you're a lot more likely to be able to match their expectations. So there is really no golden recipe for good UX. But I think if you create a simple, useful, beautiful app, a beautifully packaged app, you're increasing your chances to make your app successful. Thank you. Are there any questions?
the client wants the same application for a tablet for Android and for iOS. And I don't know, there are, like, the desire of the client is really to have identical looking applications. And from the developer side, like I'm working, like also the guy developing iOS is working in the same company as I do. So we're talking, well, for some things it makes sense, for some other things it makes sense to stick to the platform guidelines, especially navigation. What are your thoughts about it?
I think that you should try to stick to the guidelines as much as possible. Even though I can understand that a company wants their brand showing through the application, given the context of the user working on or using his Android device all day, yours will be the odd one out. It doesn't fit the experience of the other applications, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. And there are other things that you can do to get branding elements into your design and still stick to the platform. For Android, you have the action bar, for instance, and you can usually set your key color in, like brand color and button colors. And there are things that you can do. So I think that is a better way to go. But is it two native apps or is it cross-platform?
Two natives.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard it so often from people complaining about this. That if they're doing projects, it's a usual case because I heard a lot of people complaining that they have to design an Android application and the client wants to look at the same like the iOS, and they're not arguing. It's difficult. I know and you have maybe you have to find some points how you can convince the client why it's useful to have an Android native look and feel. And this is maybe one point,
Actually, you will get many bad ratings based on if you give an iOS experience to Android users.
So in your cases, how can you convince my client not to use the iOS look? And you can maybe take famous apps which are very successful on iOS and which have did the same mistake and had the same Android application, the same looking Android application like the iOS one, and you just compare the ratings and say, look, on the iOS the rating star is like, because the rating system is the same on iOS and Android, so it's like a 5-star system. So you can say on iOS it's like 4.5 star and on Android it's like 3 stars, and the mostly bad comments is because it looks like iOS, and I think this is the way to go.
And this is an interesting thing as well, because usually when it looks the same on both platforms, it looks like iOS. And
because my client, like the guy I'm talking about, is iOS user.
Yeah,
exactly.
And if it were the other way around, if you decided to look like Android and you talk to the person who is asking for this application and you show it looking like Android and suggesting it to be presented like this on his iOS device, it might be a bit different. That perspective hasn't really been thought of from the iOS perspective.
Actually, I think Apple won't even accept an app that looks like
No, definitely not. So.
Right.
It's also almost impossible to implement.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's easier now with iOS 7.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the button placements, but at least the flatness of the UI.
I think you can bring up cost as an issue as well, because trying to mimic the native iOS pop-up menus, for example, or implementing the back button on all pages, that costs money. And you don't need that because you have a back button on the Android phone that actually exists on all of them. You don't need to have an extra in the UI. So making sure that they do understand that this will cost you a lot more, then you might be more successful in the arguments because they are looking at cost.
But honestly, it's not too bad. I mean, I think the client understands already that there must be some difference, but sometimes how you want to weight it is like, do you really want to go totally US look and feel, or you want to be a little bit in the middle, a bit hybrid? I think we're a little bit hybrid. It's not too bad. But okay, thanks for the tips.
Do we have time for a question? a small one.
Yeah.
So, because it's not really about usability, but because we touched the topic of functionality, how to really find a core functionality.
Okay.
For
So-
example, you're developing an email client, but for a company. They want to have their internal email client.
Yeah.
How would I define the really core functionality?
So in that case, I would put together a small workshop or focus group, inviting some stakeholders, project leader of the team, maybe some people within the organization who are the intended end users of the application, and ask them what it is they actually need in that email solution. And I think from that you will get a lot of information on where to start and target it.
But it's an easy way. You just ask for the users what do they need. And if they kind of don't know what they need, is there any techniques, I don't know?
Yeah, you can. I think mostly you do get important information about what they need when you do that. So if you just ask them what do you need, it might be difficult, but if you do, a small sketching session and ask them, so basically bringing a lot of pens and papers and having them sketch down ideas, and if they don't want to start sketching, they just start explaining maybe what they need. You can start sketching and they will correct you where it's wrong, and sort of you can do an interactive process there. But it is difficult if there's no information, but usually there is.
But also challenge them when they say they actually need a specific function. Try to set that into the context and see if it's actually as necessary as the other functions they were asking about. You make sure that you challenge the responses and say that we can't have everything because everyone wants everything in an application. So whenever they find a new feature, put that in the list of what's most important. Will we move this on top and remove something else? Or is that actually not that important? You hide it away and you have the most important features still there. But otherwise, if you don't challenge them, they want to have everything all the time. Then that will not work.
And you can also go by frequency, so you can ask how often do you use it, how often do you use per day. If it's like 100 times per day, click on this button, it's maybe important, And if it's like once in a week, it's less important. It's also an indicator of it's useful. It can be, but not always.
I think because it's 100 times a day, probably not the button should be there all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, okay.
Of that button.